John Mayall, OBE is an English blues singer, guitarist, organist and songwriter, whose musical career spans over 50 years. In the 1960s, he was the founder of John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, a band which has counted among its members some of the most famous blues and blues rock musicians. They include Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Jack Bruce, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, Mick Taylor, Don "Sugarcane" Harris, Harvey Mandel, Larry Taylor, Aynsley Dunbar, Hughie Flint, Jon Hiseman, Dick Heckstall-Smith, Andy Fraser, Johnny Almond, Walter Trout, Coco Montoya and Buddy Whittington. Biography: born in Macclesfield, Cheshire in 1933, Mayall's father was Murray Mayall, a guitarist and jazz music enthusiast. From an early age, John was drawn to the sounds of American blues players such as Lead Belly, Albert Ammons, Pinetop Smith, and Eddie Lang, and taught himself to play the piano, guitars, and harmonica. Mayall spent 3 years in Korea for national service and, during a period of leave, he bought his first electric guitar. Back in England, he enrolled at Manchester College of Art and started playing with semi-professional bands. After graduation, he obtained a job as an art designer but continued to play with local musicians. In 1963, he opted for a full-time musical career and moved to London. His previous craft would be put to good use in the designing of covers for many of his coming albums. Since the end of the 1960s, Mayall has lived in the U.S. A brush fire destroyed his house in Laurel Canyon in 1979, seriously damaging his musical collections and archives. Mayall has been married twice, and has 6 grandchildren. His second wife, Maggie Mayall, is an American blues performer, and since the early 1980s took part in the management of her husband's career. The pair divorced in 2011. In 2005, Mayall was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire in the Honours List. Early years: in 1956, with college fellow Peter Ward, Mayall had founded the Powerhouse Four, which consisted of both men and other local musicians with whom they played at local dances. In 1962, Mayall became a member of the Blues Syndicate. The band was formed by trumpeter John Rollins and alto saxophonist Jack Masarek, who had seen the Alexis Corner Band at a Manchester club and wanted to try a similar blend of jazz and blues. It also included rhythm guitarist Ray Cummings and drummer Hughie Flint, whom Mayall already knew. In 1962, John and his band were frequent and popular artists at all-night R&B sessions at the Twisted Wheel Cellar Club in central Manchester. Alexis Corner persuaded Mayall to opt for a full-time musical career and move to London, where Corner introduced him to many other musicians and helped them to find gigs. In late 1963, with his band, which was now called the Bluesbreakers, Mayall started playing at the Marquee Club. The lineup was Mayall, Ward, John McVie on bass and guitarist Bernie Watson, formerly of Cyril Davis in the R&B All-Stars. The next spring, Mayall obtained his first recording date with producer Ian Samwell. The band, with Martin Hart at the drums, recorded 2 tracks, Crawling Up a Hill as well as Mr. James. Shortly after, Hughie Flint replaced Hart and Roger Dean took the guitar from Bernie Watson. This lineup backed John Lee Hooker on his British tour in 1964. Mayall was offered a recording contract by Decca and, on December 7, 1964, a live performance of the band was recorded at the Clark's Clique. A later studio-recorded single, Crocodile Walk, was released along with the album, but both failed to achieve any success and the contract was terminated. In April 1965, former Yardbirds guitarist Eric Clapton replaced Roger Dean and John Mayall's career entered a decisive phase. Mid-1960s through 1971 Eric Clapton as guitarist, 1965 Euro 66, in 1965, with Eric Clapton as their new guitar player, the Bluesbreakers began attracting considerable attention. That summer the band cut a couple tracks for a single, I'm Your Witch Doctor BW Telephone Blues. In August, however, Clapton left for a jaunt to Greece with a bunch of relative musical amateurs calling themselves the Glands. John Wedder, John Slaughter, and Jeff Crevett attempted to fill in as Bluesbreaker guitarist but, finally, Peter Green took charge. John McVie was dismissed, and during the next few months Jack Bruce, from the Graham Bond Organization, played bass. In November 1965 Clapton returned, and Green departed as Mayall guaranteed Clapton his spot back in the Bluesbreakers whenever he tired of the glands. McVie was allowed back, and Bruce left to join Manfred Mann, but not before a live date by the Mayall-Clapton-Bruce Flint lineup was recorded on Mayall's 2-track tape recorder at London's Flamingo Club in November. The rough recording provided tracks that later appeared on the 1969 compilation Looking Back and the 1977 Primal Solos. The same lineup also entered the studio to record a planned single, On Top of the World, which was not released at that time. Mayall and Clapton cut a couple of tracks without the others. Lonely Years B.W. Bernard Jenkins was released as a single the next August on producer Mike Vernon's Poda Records label. In a November 1965 session, blues pianist-singer champion Jack Dupree got Mayall and Clapton to play on a few tracks. In April 1966 the Bluesbreakers returned to Decca Studios to record a second LP with producer Vernon. The sessions, with horn arrangements for some tracks, lasted just 3 days. Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton was released in the UK on July 22, 1966. Several of the 12 tracks were covers of pure Chicago blues. Mayall wrote or arranged 5. And Eric debuted as lead vocalist, and began his practice of paying tribute to Robert Johnson, with Ramblin' on My Mind. The album was Mayall's commercial breakthrough, rising to number 6 on the British chart, and has since gained classic status, largely for the audacious aggressiveness and molten fluidity of Clapton's guitar playing. It's Eric Clapton who steals the limelight, reports Music Mag Beat Instrumental, adding with unintended understatement, and no doubt several copies of the album will be sold on the strength of his name. In the meantime, on June 11 the formation of Cream Clapton, bassist Jack Bruce, and drummer Ginger Baker had been revealed in the music press, much to the embarrassment of Clapton, who had not said anything about this to Mayall. Eric's last scheduled gig with the Bluesbreakers was July 17 in Bexley, southeast of London. Cream made a warm-up club debut July 29 in Manchester and its official live debut 2 days later at the 6th National Jazz and Blues Festival, Windsor. Peter Green as guitarist, 1966–67, Mayall had to replace Clapton, and he succeeded in persuading Peter Green to come back. During the following year, with Green on guitar and various other sidemen, some 40 tracks were recorded. The album A Hard Road was released in February 1967. Today its expanded versions include most of this material, and the album itself also stands as a classic. Early 1967 Mayall released an EP recorded with American blues sharpist Paul Butterfield. But Peter Green gave notice and soon started his own project, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, which eventually was to include all 3 of Mayall's Bluesbreakers at this time, Green, McVie, and drummer Mick Fleetwood, who was a bluesbreaker for only a couple of weeks. Mick Taylor as guitarist, 1967–69, Mayall's first choice to replace Green was 18-year-old David Aylist, guitarist from the Attack. Aylist declined, however, and went on to form the Knees with organist Keith Emerson. Through both a musicians wanted ad and Melody Maker on June 10 and his own search, Mayall found 3 other potential guitarists for his Bluesbreakers, a black musician named Terry Edmonds, John Moorshead, and 18-year-old Mick Taylor. The latter made the band quickly, but Mayall also decided to hire Edmonds as a rhythm guitarist for a few days. In the meantime, on a single day in May 1967, Mayall had assembled a studio album to showcase his own abilities. Former Artwoods drummer Keith Hartley appeared on only half of the tracks, and everything else was played by Mayall. The album was released in November titled The Blues Alone. A 6-piece lineup consisting of Mayall, Mick Taylor as lead guitarist, John McVie still on bass, Hughie Flint or Hartley on drums, and Rip Cant and Chris Mercer on saxophone recorded the album Crusade on 11th and 12th July 1967. These Bluesbreakers spent most of the year touring abroad, and Mayall taped the shows on a portable recorder. At the end of the tour, he had over 60 hours of tapes, which he edited into an album in 2 volumes, Diary of a Band, Vols 1 and 2, released in February 1968. Meanwhile, a few lineup changes had occurred. McVie had departed and was replaced by Paul Williams, who himself soon quit to join Alan Price and was replaced by Keith Tillman. Dick Heckstall-Smith had taken the sax spot. Following a U.S. tour, there were more lineup changes, starting with the troublesome bass position. First, Mayall replaced bassist Tillman with 15-year-old Andy Fraser. Within 6 weeks, though, Fraser left to join Free and was replaced by Tony Reeves, previously a member of the New Jazz Orchestra. Hartley was required to leave, and he was replaced by New Jazz Orchestra drummer Jon Hiseman. Henry Lowther, who played violin and cornet, joined in February 1968. 2 months later the Bluesbreakers recorded Bare Wires, co-produced by Mayall and Mike Vernon, which came up to number 6. Hiseman, Reeves, and Heckstall-Smith then moved on to form Colosseum. The Mayall lineup retained Mick Taylor and added drummer Colin Allen and a young bassist named Stephen Thompson. In August 1968 the new quartet recorded Blues from Laurel Canyon. On June 13, 1969, after nearly 2 years with Mayall, Taylor left and officially joined the Rolling Stones. Mark Almond period, 1969 70, Chas Crane filled in briefly on guitar. Drummer Allen departed to join Stone the Crows. This left as the only holdover bassist Thompson, who would also eventually join Stone the Crows. Mayall tried a new format with lower volume, acoustic instruments, and no drummer. He recruited acoustic fingerstyle guitarist John Mark and flautist saxophonist John Almond. Mark was best known as Marianne Faithfull's accompanist for 3 years and for having been a member of the band Sweet Thursday. Almond had played with Zoot Money and Alan Price and was no stranger to Mayall's music. He had played baritone sax on 4 cuts of Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton and some of A Hard Road. This new band was markedly different from previous Mayall projects, and its making is well documented both on the 1999 double CD The Masters and on the 2004 DVD The Godfather of British Blues, The Turning Point. Along with the big change in sound, Mayall decided on a big change in scenery, a move to Los Angeles. The new band made its U.S. debut at the Newport Jazz Festival on July 5, whilst the 12th July performance at the Fillmore East provided the tracks for the live album The Turning Point. A studio album, Empty Rooms, was recorded with the same personnel, with Mayall's next bassist, former Canned Heat member Larry Taylor, playing bass in a duet with Thompson on To a Princess. Harvey Mandel as guitarist, 1970-71, Mayall continued the experiment of formations without drummers on 2 more albums, although he took on a new electric blues rock R&B band in guitarist Harvey Mandel and bassist Larry Taylor, both plucked from Canned Heat, and wailing violinist Don Sugarcane Harris, lately of the Johnny Otis Show. On USA Union, though, Mandel was compelled to make do without his remarkable sustain and usage of feedback as musical, even melodic, technique. And on Memories the band was stripped down to a trio with Taylor and Ventures guitarist Jerry McVie. In November 1970 Mayall launched a recording project involving many of the most notable musicians with whom he had played during the previous several years. The double album Back to the Roots features Clapton, Mick Taylor, Jerry McVie and Harvey Mandel on guitar. Sugarcane Harris on violin. Almond on woodwinds. Thompson and Larry Taylor on bass. And Hartley on drums. Paul Lagos was with Sugarcane and ended up drumming on 5. Mayall wrote all the songs and sang all the vocals, as usual by now, plus played harmonica, guitar, keyboards, drums, and percussion. The London sessions took place in January 1971 and as such represent some of Clapton's last work before Derek and the Dominoes attempted later follow-up sessions and band disintegration that spring. Back to the Roots did not promote new names, and USA Union and Memories had been recorded with American musicians. Mayall had exhausted his catalytic role on the British blues rock scene and was living in LA. Yet, the list of musicians who benefited from association with him, starting with ruling the London blues scene, remains impressive. 1970s are Euro 1990s equals. By the start of the 1970s, Mayall had relocated in the USA, where he spent most of the next 15 years, recording with local musicians for various labels. In August 1971, Mayall produced a jazz-oriented session for bluesman Albert King, and a few months later took on tour the musicians present in the studio. A live album, Jazz Blues Fusion, was released in the following year, with Mayall on harmonica, guitar and piano, Blue Mitchell on trumpet, Clifford Solomon and Ernie Watts on saxophones, Larry Taylor on bass, Ron Selico on drums and Freddie Robinson on guitar. A few personnel changes are noted at the release of a similar album in 1973, The Live Moving On. During the next decade, Mayall continued shifting musicians and switching labels, and released a score of albums. Tom Wilson, Don Nix and Alan Toussaint occasionally served as producers. At this stage of his career, most of Mayall's music was rather different from electric blues played by rock musicians, incorporating jazz, funk or pop elements and adding even female vocals. A notable exception is The Last of the British Blues, a live album excused apparently by its title for the brief return to this type of music. Return of the Bluesbreakers. In 1982, Mayall was reunited with Mick Taylor, John McVie and Colin Allen, three musicians of his 1960s lineups, for a 2-year world tour from which a live album would emerge a decade later. In 1984, Mayall restored the name Bluesbreakers for a lineup comprising the two lead guitars of Walter Trout and Coco Montoya, bassist Bobby Haynes and drummer Joe Yowell. The mythic name did, perhaps, something to enhance the interest in a band which by all standards was already remarkable. A successful world tour and live recordings achieved the rest. In the early 1990s, most of the excitement was already spent, and Buddy Whittington became the sole lead guitarist in a formation which included then organist Tom Canning. On the occasion of the 40th year of his career, Mayall received carte blanche to invite fellow musicians for the recording of a celebratory album. Along for the Ride appeared in 2001, credited to John Mayall and Friends, with 20 names listed on the cover, including some Bluesbreakers, old and new, and also Gary Moore, Johnny Lang, Steve Cropper, Steve Miller, Otis Rush, Billy Gibbons, Chris Ree, Jeff Healey, Shannon Kerfman and a few others. To celebrate his 70th birthday, Mayall reunited with special guests Eric Clapton, Mick Taylor and Chris Barber during a fundraiser show. This Unite for UNICEF concert took place on July 19, 2003 at the King's Dock Arena in Liverpool and was captured on film for a DVD release. In 2005, Mayall was awarded an OBE in the Honours List. "It's the only major award I've ever received. I've never had a hit record or a Grammy or been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame," commented Mayall. In November 2008, Mayall announced on his website he was disbanding the Bluesbreakers, to cut back on his heavy workload and give himself freedom to work with other musicians. 3 months later, a solo world tour was announced, with Rocky Athers on guitar, Greg Ratzab on bass, and Jay Davenport on drums. Tom Canning, on organ, joined the band for the tour, which started in March 2009. An album was released in September 2009. Since then, Mayall has continued to tour with the same backing band, minus Canning, who left due to other priorities. Discography = Original John Mayall albums = John Mayall's website only = Private Stash limited releases = Unofficial editions and bootlegs = DVDs = Singles = John Mayall's Sidemen, a comprehensive list of musicians who have recorded and or toured with John Mayall. A few notable names: guitar, Eric Clapton, Roger Dean, Peter Green, Mick Taylor, Harvey Mandel, Freddie Robinson, Jimmy McCulloch, Cal David, Walter Trout, Coco Montoya, Randy Resnick, Sonny Landreth, Buddy Whittington, Eric Steckel, Robin Ford, Rocky Athers, bass, Jack Bruce, John McVie, Stephen Thompson, Larry Taylor, Tony Reeves, Hank Van Sickle, Greg Ratzab, drums, Hughie Flint, Keith Hartley, Aynsley Dunbar, Paul Lagos, Soko Richardson, Jon Hiseman, Colin Allen, Mick Fleetwood. Keyboards, Dr. John. Vocals, harmonica, Paul Butterfield. See also John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, British Blues, Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Mick Taylor. References. External links: John Mayall's website, Mayall, Sessions, Concerts in Wolfgang's Vault, Fillmore West 68. Bottom line 77, ABC Records press release, John Mayall interview 2007, by Brian D. Holland, John Mayall interview with Gerard Dicker, John Mayall at the Internet Movie Database, works by or about John Mayall in libraries, French, John Mayall interview published in the French magazine Guitar Part, John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers Fillmore Auditorium San Francisco, ca February 9, 1968. Wolfgangsvault.com. Retrieved September 6, 2015. 2. Archived October 6, 2009 at the Wayback Machine.